Hello BookTube, my name's Daniel, welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet, I've got no rhythm, and today I'm going to do a tag. This is the authors I've read the most books by tag. I was tagged in this by Mark from Book Time with Elvis, and I think we just met Elvis for the first time, so thank you for sharing that with us, Mark. And I believe the original tag was by Jeremy Fee, who seems to have been making YouTube videos for like 14 years, and only in the last half year or so has been focusing on books. But thank you for this tag also, Jeremy, for creating it. So I've got 10 books here, which one from each of the top 10 authors that I've read the most books by. But I thought I'd take you through the top 25 down, and then we'll do the countdown from 10 just to give you an idea. I've seen so many wide ranges. I've watched a few of these videos, and I saw yesterday AJ Reeds did a great one where he started in number 10. It was an author he read 4 books by, and then by the time he got to number 1, it was an author he'd read 185 books by. So I don't have that range, but if I take you through my list of top 25, I've got here at 25 the 25th highest number of books I've read by an author is 10. So you'll see as we get higher. So I've read 10 books by Stephen Donaldson. I've read 11 books each by Ian McEwan and Raymond Chandler. 12 I've got Salman Rushdie, and then also the Rolling Galbraith. So 7 Potters, Casual Vacancy, and first 4 Gorman Strike Galbraith books, so I've put those together. 13 books by Elmore Leonard, Thomas Hardy, and Steve Hamilton, who writes sort of crime books set in North Dakota on the border with Canada. Very cold, all books are very cold. And also 13 books by Martin Amis. So actually there's a nice step there. 11 by McEwan, 12 by Rushdie, 13 by Amis. So Amis wins that battle of the British gentleman. 14 books by Gregory MacDonald, who wrote the Fletch series and a couple of offshoots. 14 books by Joe Lansdale, who's got the whatchamacallit, I forget the name of their characters. Happen Leonard, mostly Happen Leonard. 14 books by Ian Fleming, that's the James Bond books. 16 books, this is 13th place. 16 books I've read by Anne Tyler. 17 books by Ian Rankin. I refer you to my earlier rant on hate reading Rankin. I think I'm done at 17. 18 books in 11th place. 18 books by Neil Gaiman, and this is a crossover between, I'm counting each of the volumes I have of the Sandman collection. So I've got 9 of the 10 Sandman, well 10 of the 11 if you include Overture of the Sandman graphic novel collections, and I've got a picture book by him, and then some novels and some essays. All in all, I'm counting that as 18 books by Neil Gaiman in 11th place. And now I will take you into the top 10. And I warn you, I should have warned you earlier, that this is going to be pretty genre heavy. The nature of this thing, when you're getting to authors who have written, we're already over 20 books, or no, we're at 18, 19 books. I would say that in most instances these are going to be genre authors. So I know that Trollope has 57, I've only read 8 of his, but even someone prolific like Salman Rushdie, so I've read a lot of Salman Rushdie, probably around about 3/4 of his output, and that comes to 12 books. But so if you want to get up in the 20s and 30s and 40s, you're going to be looking at a lot of genre authors. So if this is not for you, if you're not interested in, and specifically for me, that's crime. It's not, there's no romance here or fantasy. A graphic, one sort of comic book author. Yeah, so if you're not really interested in crime or hearing me go on about my life, as I tend to ramble, because I'm going to take you through these books and how I got to them, then this may not be for you. But before, at number 10, the author I've read the 10th highest number of books by is not a genre author necessarily. This is, I think most people would consider this literary fiction. It's Ellen Gilchrist. I've read 19 books by Ellen Gilchrist. That is the 10th most read author in my collection. And I picked one from the collection. This is the Anna Papers. And the reason I picked this is because I came to Gilchrist primarily as a short story writer, and I say in the UK she was published by Faber, and for years I would pick up those collections and the odd novel or connected short stories. She has recurring characters that show up even in the short story collections, and this is a full novel, the Anna Papers. And the reason I picked this is also because this is an American. This is I was chasing this for a while, and you couldn't find a copy of it in the UK, and I must have picked this up on a business trip to the States. This is February '98. I bought this. I couldn't tell you exactly when I was. I'm guessing probably St. Louis or some bookstore that I would have found this in. I think I would have paid full price. Oh, Borders. Borders, is that not? Yes, Borders America, $11.95. Not you. I've got one right there that I was telling a stupid story. The Anna Papers is a terrific full-length novel with all of Gilchrist's wit and humanity and sly sharpness, but overall sort of embracing of every kind of good. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that in the very first chapter, Anna, upon finding that she has cancer, takes a pill and walks off a pier, and the Anna Papers is about her executor going through her papers and finding out why and who she was, and this reclaiming of her agency at the time of her mortality. It's terrific. So Anna Hand is the Anna Papers, who is a cousin of Rhoda Manning, who appears in a whole bunch of other stories. And it's great. And just another fun point, while I was preparing this video, I sort of had a quick look at Goodreads to remind myself, and the only thing that information that came up on Goodreads was that my brother had just given this 5 stars, read it in 2019. So that gave me a sort of warm and fuzzy feelings that even though he only lives 10 minutes away from me on the other side of town, that occasionally we cross paths and read the same things, and that he's reading Ellen Gilchrist, and particularly this book, which was such a marvelous read. So I've read 19 books by Ellen Gilchrist, up one, 20 books. So in place number 9 on this list, counted down, countdown. At number 9 on the list we have James Ellroy. I've read 20 books by James Ellroy, 19 by Ellen Gilchrist, and this is where it all started for me. This is American Tabloid, which I bought in November '95 and read breathlessly in a couple of sittings. And if you're unfamiliar with Ellroy, so this is sort of mid-career, but this was, I think, really his breakthrough book. So after I read this, I went back and read The Black Dahlia, which is the first in that LA Quartet, which was filmed as LA Confidential, is the third in that series, in that 4 books. American Tabloid was the start of a new trilogy. I think that it's termed the Underworld trilogy. But when I read this was new, and we didn't know that we were going to get 2 more books in the trilogy. And there's nothing more you can say other than it's breathtaking. Ellroy mixes fact and fiction, so we have real characters, whether they are J. Edgar Hoover or Lana Turner. He's obsessed with old Hollywood in the 40s and 50s, and everything here is so densely plotted, and yet his prose is bonkers, staccato, tabloid-esque, and he switches for different points of view, not always in full sentences, sometimes very broken down, but overall, I mean, I think he got less coherent later on, and was criticised for that. One of the books one of the books that precedes this, it's one of the books in that in the LA Quartet, is called White Jazz, and there is a kind of sort of jazzy freeform to his prose. It kind of doesn't play to the usual rhythms and beats that we expect from certainly from authors. And I hesitate even to stick Ellroy in a genre. He is a literary man of the highest order. He may also be utterly bonkers. I think he's occasionally referred to himself, or at least if other people refer to him, he's taken on the name as the demon dog of American letters. And while I think he may have calmed down, he's still writing. We're in a couple of books into his latest quartet. But having read American Tabloid, I went back to the start of his career, and read everything, which is sort of Brown's Requiem and Clandestine, and then some short stories, Dick Contino's Blues and stuff, and then that early trilogy, Lloyd, What's His Face trilogy, one of them was made into a movie called Cop with James Woods. So I went back and read everything before American Tabloid, and have continued to buy everything that he's written since. He is a monster of a human being and a genius of a writer. I don't mean he's a monster in his personal life. I mean his ability and his talent is monstrous. But yes, I might be a little scared to be stuck in an elevator with him. But that's American Tabloid by James Elroy, one of 20 of Elroy's books that I've read. Coming in 8th place, I have read 21 books by George Pelecanos, someone I spoke to about when I did a sort of March Mystery Madness 5 series recommendations, and one of them was a series by George Pelecanos, the Nick Stefanos series. This is the first in another series of his. I don't even remember what their collected title of them is, but this is the big Blowdown by George. He's sometimes called George Pelecanos, sometimes George P. Pelecanos, and I love this because, as you can see, I bought this for $1 in a Barnes & Noble in America. This was September 2000. Again, not sure where I was, probably St. Louis, because that's where I used to go in those days. So I bought this and bought it to put aside because I hadn't finished the first Nick Stefanos series at this point, and I knew this was the start of the next one, so I bought this. But buying a hardback book for $1, this was originally published in 1996, I believe, and this is a sort of historical noir, so this is the rest of this quartet continues with the children of the protagonists in this book, but still this was a fine read, and I remember it very fondly, and I've still read everything Pelecanos puts out, and he, not just a novelist these days, he's a writer for TV, and works a lot with David Simon on The Wire and subsequent Simon shows, and it's just a fine crime writer, and highly recommend. And this was one of my favourite books, and the fact that I got it for $1 was just a thrill. I have read, that's 8th place. In 7th place, I have read 25 books, which seems like a ridiculous amount of books by a chap who I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about on BookTube. So, even in those authors those booktubers that talk about crime, I wonder if Duncan McCurdy has read any. Andrew Vax. Duncan, let me know if you've read, because it turns out I've read 25 of his books. This was the first one that I read, and this is the first in his longest running series, which is now ended, which was with a character called Burke and his found family, and this is Flood, and it's gritty and nasty and down in the underworld. Burke is a criminal, a career criminal who preys on people stupider and more racist and more criminal than he. It's a twisted morality, but he has a very clearly defined morality, and he has a family that he has collected around him of his, and it is a found family rather than a real family. And this is a point that hits home time and again, because a lot of his experience has been abuse, and there is talk in the series of abuse of children and even very young children, and so one doesn't necessarily have to trust one's biological family, and it is the family that you find and the family that you make that is important to Burke, and that is a family that he is intensely loyal to. I'm making it sound very profound and very serious. They're also absolutely nutty capers and heists, but a family is at the heart of all this, and he is surrounded by Max the Silent is his all-powerful brother, who he works with and who can hide in the shadows and no one will go and find him, and he's there to provide muscle. And then he's also got another member of the family is the Mole, who I believe is meant to be either a Holocaust survivor or the child of. He's older than Burke, and he lives in a used car lot underground, and he can hack anything and build anything, and you get these kind of so they're superheroes without powers, and it's a team, and they work together, and each one has his part to play, and these stories repeat themselves over again. Intensely enjoyable for me. I read 18 of them. As I say, they're always dark. There's always gritty. There's always bad guys. And our heroes are bad guys, but they always stick it to the people who are worse than they are. And they're sexy and funny and gritty and noir. And I love Burke. I've read some of his non-Burke stuff, and some of it's been really poor. The last couple of so he finished out the Burke series, and the last couple of non-Burke books I read were really poor. But these were great. There's 18 of them, and at least the first half are just terrific fun. And the very first one is Flood by Andrew Vachss, Vachss, pronounced to rhyme with tax. Andrew Vachss. And coming in sixth place is a guy also spoken about a little bit, Walter Mosley. Walter Mosley, another great crime writer, most famous for the Easy Rawlins series, the first of which was filmed as Devil in a Blue Dress with Denzel Washington and Don Cheadle, I couldn't remember his name last time, as Mouse. And then another of his series, there's only been 3 books with Socrates Fought Low, and the first of those was Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned, which I believe was made into a sort of HBO movie with Lawrence Fishburne at one time. And I picked this one out of the 28 books by Walter Mosley that I've read. He's in 6th place. 28 books by Walter Mosley, so that's all the Easy Rawlins, and then the Leonid McGills and the Phyllis Jones, Paris Minton, and Socrates Fought Low. He's got a number of serious characters, and this is connected short stories, and Socrates Fought Low is a very angry man, and these stories are absolutely terrific, and I don't even know if they are crimes. So Easy Rawlins is fairly straightforward. He's a sort of created private eye in LA, starting in the 40s, coming through, we're up to the 60s. Socrates Fought Low is a more modern character. He's a man who's spent time in prison. He's an angry man. He's got lots to be angry about, but I don't think there's any crimes here being solved or any mysteries uncovered. But this is defiantly noir and a first-rate title if you're interested in getting into Mosley without taking on all the baggage of a long-running series. Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned, interconnected short stories, and fine work. Coming in at number 5 is another one of these combined sort of pseudonym titles, pseudonym authors, and this is Donald Westlake / Richard Stark. And in actual fact, of the 29 books that I've read by Donald Westlake, I think 28 of them were attributed to Richard Stark, which was his alter ego, and only one actual Donald Westlake book. And the most famous, Richard Stark, this is the pseudonymous author of the Parker series, which has been filmed a couple of times. There was Point Blank with Lee Marvin, and then there was Mel Gibson, Payback, is playing the same character. It might have been called Porter for whatever reasons. And then there was also a Jason Statham movie where he's playing Parker, I think, with J-Lo. And they're all fun. Well, the Point Blank is a high-class affair. But the Mel Gibson is plenty of fun, but not necessarily true to the original character. And this is the very first of those Parker books. So you can see it says Donald Westlake. This is a later... this is published by Avon. The original book would have come out in 1962, and this is from 1984. So it says Donald Westlake writing as Richard Stark, because I think by this stage Westlake was a bigger name, even though he's not terribly well remembered now. And so it was important to have his name back on the thing. But these were originally published as if they were written by Richard Stark, even though Westlake is his real name. And Parker is a thief. A violent thief. He is very possibly a sociopath. There is no self-reflection here. There is no doubt. This is a man who moves only in one direction, and that is towards his goal. He has some kind of code so that when he is double-crossed, nothing stops him from getting payback. That was the name of the Mel Gibson movie. This one is a bit published under a couple of names, so this was also published as Point Blank, as I say, and this is The Hunter. It might have even been published on, like a few of the Stark books were published and republished under different names. And then there's also 4 books by Stark about a side character called Grofeld, who is just a thief and is not as violent or as sociopathic as Parker. And I got 4 of those as well that were hard to track down and had to find. Sometimes had to pay up for those copies. But this was the first one that I got, and I ordered this pre-internet. I'd found somebody and wrote off to them, and they sent me a couple of books in the post. And I love this sort of broken down mass market paperback. This whole thing is 150 pages, 155. And as I say, momentum only in one direction. He has a goal. He doesn't. If there's a double cross, if something happens, if the plan breaks down, Parker keeps moving, and they're absolutely brilliant, and I highly recommend Richard Stark's Parker series. Richard Stark is Don Westlake. And I've read 29 books by Stark Westlake. Coming in at position number 4 is Lawrence Block, for whom I've read 33 of his books. Again, this is another crime writer who has written a number of series. So I came to Block through Matthew Scudder, is one of his private detective characters, an ex-cop, a recovering alcoholic, and he takes on all sorts of cases and sees them through. And he's a pretty good detective and a broken man trying to make the world right. Those are quite dark. But he has another character, Bernie Roddenbar, who is a gentleman burglar, and each of those books is the burglar and the burglar and the whatever. And Bernie Roddenbar, yes, there are sometimes murders, things that happen, but he's not a man of violence. He's a cerebral man who runs a bookshop in between pulling jobs. And then there's another series about Keller, who is a hitman, and each one is short stories where he is assigned a different person to hit, and how he manages to track the person, work out the best possible way to carry out his assassination without being detected, and get away and get home to his stamp collection. Anyway, so the first book that I read, and just to show you how strict I am about these, I'm saying I read 33 books. I'm including in that number of 33 this as one. So often I've done this when I've come to a new series or a new character to me. I've found I go online and say, okay, I'm going to give Block a chance, I'm going to give Matthew Scudder a chance, and I find these collected bind-ups of 3, and it only works for me if they are the 3 in order. So this is books 1, 2, and 3 in the Matthew Scudder series, and this is a 1-volume edition in hardback that was then published subsequently. And I would have bought this this was originally published in the UK for £16.99. I would have paid under a £5 for this, and I bought this in May 2010, and this was an ex-library book. You can see that, Edinburgh City Libraries. And when I buy collections like this to start a character, I read them as one. So I start at page 1 and read through to the end. So I'm getting 3 Scudder novels in one go, and I've done this with Harlan Coben. I did this with what's the other guy? Robert Crace. And didn't go on to read any more after that, so I stopped. There was the Harlan Coben is the Myron Bolitar series. I read those first 3, and they seemed pretty samey to me. I guess one day when I'm stuck in bed with nothing to do, I might read some more Harlan Coben books. But I was pretty much done. Robert Crace also, the Cole and Pike, I think, are the 2 characters there, and I read the first 3 and decided I was done with it. But when I read the first 3 Scudders, I've gone on and read all the others. So in total, 33 books. These are the early ones. Are very short. So this is 3 books, and it only comes to around about 400 pages for 3 books. So you can imagine each of them originally was sort of very short and pulpy, and later on the character developed and the stories got a bit better. So this was a great place for me to start, and I was happy to take the Matt Scudder mysteries, which include The Sins of the Fathers, in the midst of death and time to murder and create. He was very wordy with his style. He still, later on, there's a Walk Among the Tombstones. The Scudder series have longer titles with sort of religious references, all those you can see. And that is Matthew Scudder, Lawrence Block, and I have read in total 33 books by Lawrence Block, and even though this has actually got 3 books, I'm counting this as 1. In third place, with one more book, than Block, I've got a comic book writer, and I'm going with Garth Ennis, and I'm calling books here collected editions. So if I had an omnibus that had 40 issues in it, I would call that one book, but I don't. I have, for Ennis, a whole bunch of collected editions, usually 5, 6 or 7 individual floppy comics collected, what some people call a graphic novel. These are trade paperbacks, whatever you want to call them. So this is Preacher, Gone to Texas, which is issues 1 to 7 of his Preacher comic. And I have 9 of the 10 editions of Preacher. I've got 12 volumes of The Boys, and I have other collected editions of Ennis's work. And he has got the darkest sensibility. I think I spoke once about an issue of The Boys, which is just filthy and impossible to show anything on a family-friendly YouTube channel. The Preacher is dark-hearted, deeply cynical. It is about the Preacher is maybe infected is not the right word, inhabited by the soul of a creature born from a demon and an angel's child. So there is some riot in heaven, a demon and an angel in sort of Romeo and Juliet kind of way come together against all propriety and have a child, and somehow the spirit of that child gets into our Preacher and gives him godly powers, or at least the power to command with the word of God, and all sorts of supernatural weirdness ensues. This is our Preacher, whose name is Jesse Custer. This is his girlfriend Tulip, and this is someone else they meet along the way, Cassidy, who has his own arc, which I will not spoil for you here. Dark, as I say, cynical, probably blasphemous, certainly offensive if you are of this delicate sensibility, or are likely to be offended by images of God and angels and the Catholic Church and its relationship to messianism along the way. Probably not offensive to anyone who's read Philip Pullman and his railing against God and the heavens and the organised church. But yeah, this is not for everyone. This particular series, that's Preacher. He's got, as I say, The Boys is just filthy but fantastic, and there are other stuff as well. And I have read in total 34 books by Garth Ennis, and I will keep buying them when I find them, and old stuff that he's done that I pick up when I can get it cheap, and I follow him going forward as well. He's still very active and writing, and I don't know if he has any ongoing series at the moment. The Boys is finished and Preachers is done, and I think so he just like limited stuff. Whether he goes back to The Boys and does more with that, we'll see based on the success of the TV series. But that's Garth Ennis. He's a difficult, but for me, thoroughly enjoyable. In second place, with 40 books, someone I also mentioned, is Ed McBain. And this is 40 books all in the same series. This is the 87th Precinct series, and this was the very first one in the series. This is Cop Hater, and this was originally published in the 50s, I believe. Originally published in 1956. And this is a Signet classic from October 73, so this is a beautiful sort of mass market paperback. Again, the first in the series. This is 150 pages, and I bought this in November 2012. So in the last 9 years, I've read 40 of these, and I have about 10 left to go, and I sort of pace them out 2 or 3 a year, just because they're delicious fun, and we follow. So the timing of these things is weird. So the first one's 1956, and I think the last one he wrote is in the early 2000s before he passed away. Ed McBain is also a pseudonym. That's not his original name. And he wrote under several pseudonyms, and you can find out who he really is if you want to look on Wikipedia. Which is just a way of saying I can't remember how to pronounce his real name. the thing about the 87th precinct, so even though this is written in 1956 and it's written contemporaneously, so these are cops in 1956 with the technology and the tools that they have in 1956. As we go forward in time, we stay with the same cops. They don't age, but the world around them moves. So we start with Steve Carella, who is probably the central character that we follow, even though there's a whole bunch of other cops that we follow along with him, that he's partnered with. There's Meyer, there's Bert Kling, there's Cotton Mather, is that his name? But Steve Carella is our lead character, and he doesn't age, so he's I would say early 40s all the way through, whether it's in 1956 or whether it's in 1986. And they're all good, and these are just the basic police procedurals, and laid the groundwork for any police procedural. But I've been enjoying them. I've read 40 of them so far. I'm going to keep going to the end because they're just super entertaining, and I get through these in an afternoon when I want to if I've been in something very heavy, literary work or whatever it is, and I say, okay, let's have a cleanse and let's just read something light, and they're superbly plotted. The dialogue is terrific, both when it's dark and when it's funny. Highly recommended Ed McBain's 87th Precinct. And coming in the number one spot, the author that I have read the most books by is Robert B. Parker, for whom I've read 54 books across 3 series. So the best known series, and the one I've read the most books, I think it's like 39 in the Spencer series, and that was a TV show in the 80s with Robert Urich, Spencer for Hire, and Avery Brooks playing Hawk. Avery Brooks, who went on to Deep Space Nine. He plays Hawk in that TV series, and then there was some TV movies later on with Joe Mantegna playing Spencer, and there was just a very really unconnected, except in name only. There was a Spencer movie last year on Netflix with Marky Mark, Sans Funky Bunch, playing Spencer, but just a different kind of Spencer. This was a Spencer who'd been to jail. Our Spencer, the real Spencer, is not somebody who goes to prison. Anyway, this is not the first in the Spencer series. This is, I think, his book 8 in the series. This was a beautiful Penguin edition from the UK, and 190 pages odd. This was the first one that I read, which is unusual for me, because usually I had to start with number 1 and work my way through. I'm sort of neurotic and anal like that, but I read number 8 first because this was given to me by someone who I worked with in London back in the early 90s, and he was really an influential character in my life because he turned me on to crime fiction. So he introduced me to Parker. He was the person who made me read Chandler. He was the person who told me that Michael Mann was an important director, and this was a time where Michael Mann was mainly known for Miami Vice and was considered, post Miami Vice in the early 90s. Miami Vice at its heyday in the sort of 86, 87. Post then was considered as kind of a joke because it was all sort of pastels and rolled up jacket sleeves and stuff. And he said, no, Mann understands crime, understands noir, and you should watch him. And then Last of the Mohicans came out, which threw everyone for a loop, and then we got Heat a few years later. So he turned me on to Michael Mann before the rest of the world was turned on to Michael Mann. He turned me on to Parker, and I've become a lifelong fan of Rob Parker. I read, this is one of 54 books of his that I've read, and he turned me on to Chandler. And when I left that job and was moving to Israel, he gifted me a copy of Chandler's Simple Art of Murder, which I still have, a sort of old, broken down, hardback, falling apart book, and he left me a note. He was a strange character, this colleague of mine. I think he was probably an alcoholic. He was certainly somebody who had issues with gambling, but when you got him talking about books and crime books in particular, he was just the most fascinating and convincing and compelling guy. So I have a lot to thank him for, and Robert P. Parker is one of them. Spence himself is another private detective with a code, a deeply moral human being, the supernatural element. There's no supernatural element, but he is supernaturally able to beat anybody in a fight, and especially when he has his friend Hawk with him, his sparring partner, who is probably even tougher than Spencer, and the two of them can take on anybody. And there's always, whenever he goes up against someone or wants to talk to someone, the bodyguard gets in his way, he has these brilliant way of sizing the guy up and determining whether he's a real fighter or just got muscle, or whether he'll be able to move and how fast he is. And the fight scenes are tremendously choreographed, some among the best I've ever read. The banter is outstanding, funny, witty, erudite, and he's constantly fighting against expectations, because Spencer is this big, brawny detective, and yet he is a cerebral man and a smart man. He's not afraid to fight, and he's perfectly capable of doing so if he has to, and not just with his fists. If he has to use a gun, he'll use a gun. But he is a man of honor, and he is a lover as well as a fighter, and just joy. Every single one of these books has been a joy to me, and this was the first one of them that I read, even though it's not the first in the series. And that is your lot, and that is 35 minutes of me talking non-stop about things that I like. And if you got this far, you really are gluttons for punishment. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.